Hello, today I'm talking to Andrew Davie, a writer. And Andrew, why don't you start off by telling us who you are and what you do aside from writing?
Okay, well, until a couple of years ago, I had been teaching. I had previously taught at the college level in Asia for a few years, um, in Macau and Hong Kong,
Hmm.
and then I moved back to the United States, and I started teaching at a school for students with learning disabilities
Oh.
uh, in Virginia.
Hmm.
And then about 3 years ago, I had a ruptured brain aneurysm, so that sort of took me out of the ball game for the foreseeable future in terms of teaching and stuff like that. So the last few years have mostly been recovering and seeing what would be possible. Um, I had lined up a tutoring job, and I substitute taught at my old school for a little while, which unfortunately was a little too overwhelming. But then the pandemic hit, and that sort of laid to waste any plans that I had made. So at this point, it's mostly writing and volunteering and doing what I can virtually. I'm hoping to get back into the teaching game at some point. Um, Even if that's going to be tutoring or virtual or perhaps get in the classroom. But that's pretty. What I've been up to pretty much these days is just trying to stay as active as possible, and stuff like that.
What level were you subbing at?
When I was subbing, it was in high school,
Mm.
um, so it was ninth through 12th, whatever class they needed me to come in for. Um, Most of the time, it was pretty easy. Just the lesson plans were already created. I just had to monitor the students.
Right.
But I had found that to be too challenging. Even though there really wasn't much to it. Previously, I had taught English, um, and writing and humanities
Hmm.
for ninth and 10th, and then the next year, 11th and 12th. So that was before the aneurysm. Um, so it's always been some form of English, either at middle school, high school, or abroad.
Did you find just classroom management was a task at this
Yeah,
point?
I mean,
Yeah.
the with that student population in particular, because they need so much support and they need, to be monitored really thoroughly. I just found it to be a little too much. I wasn't at 100% just with my processing and capabilities and stuff at that point. Um, so that was a little bit, and I think a lot of those kids could sense that they would be able to pull a quick one on me. So once that kind of got out of hand, then there
Hmm.
really wasn't much I could do about it.
Yeah, I asked because I've done some of that work myself, and I know the challenge. Teaching, well, attempting to teach when really mostly what you're doing is trying to fool the kids into sitting down and being quiet and listening. You recently had a book come out, is that right? In December, I guess, of 2020?
Yeah, I had uh, a novella come out, which was the first book that I had written sort of post aneurysm, which had
Hmm.
started as like an opportunity just to see if I could still do it. Uh, and I kind of took all of these old ideas that I'd had. The book is a period piece set in the Great Depression about a gold heist, um, and there were a lot of things in it that were sort of inside jokes between me and my brother. Um, so I ended up creating characters that were sort of based on him and I, that had a lot of our mannerisms, and then just sort of pulling all of these things that I sort of like how Tarantino does with some of his movies. He will have homages to other things that he really enjoys. So I thought to myself, let me think about 1930s era sort of prohibition gangsters and try to throw all of that in there.
Hmm.
Um, So yeah, that was close to the, but that came out with Close to the Bone.
Oh, that was with Close to the Bone.
Yeah, that was
Could you pronounce the title for us?
yeah, that was called No One Runs Faster Than a Bullet.
Oh, okay. In my research, I found a book called Ouroboros.
Oh, yeah, okay, yeah. So I the first thing that I'd ever gotten published in terms of crime fiction was with All Due Respect.
Hmm.
That was called Pavement,
Right.
and then uh, Ouroboros or Ouroboros, it doesn't really matter, was the follow up in that series.
Mm.
Um, and that also came out in December. It was sort of like, lightning struck, and I had two books come out in the same month. So that was with All Due Respect. No One Runs Faster Than a Bullet was with Close to the Bone. And yeah, it was one of those things where, when it rained, it poured.
Hmm.
So
You said that you taught in Japan. Is that correct?
uh, I
Or,
was in Hong Kong and
in-
Macau.
excuse me, Hong Kong.
Oh,
Sorry.
that's good.
Did you teach ESL?
I didn't. When I was in Hong Kong, it was all I was teaching in a community college,
Mm.
so they were all associate's degree students who a lot of times would take electives,
Mm.
um, or they would take sort of classes so that they could enter into a 4-year school. So a lot of it was sort of remedial. It was never really ESL, but it
Hmm.
was sort of I think one of the electives I taught was English for business communication. So some of the things we did, we went over how to draft a resume. Um, how would you respond to an email if you were in like in an office? What are certain things to avoid? Things like that. So I guess it was sort of based in an ESL environment,
Hmm.
but it was mostly more traditional English.
And when was that? How long ago was that?
Yeah, I was in Macau in 2012, and I was in Hong Kong in 2013.
So the troubles had not started yet.
No, 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 no. It was in fact, yeah, it was a completely different time and place.
How,
And
how did you enjoy that living in Hong Kong?
it was great. I mean, I actually lived in a place called the New Territories.
Hmm.
So Hong Kong it's sort of like Hong Kong Island is basically like Manhattan,
Hmm.
where that's where it's like a busy city. That's what you see when in all the uh, still photos you might see of Hong Kong, with all the skyscrapers. That's where all the expats usually do business.
Mm.
Um, then there's Kowloon, which is sort of like, I guess, Brooklyn or Queens. It's still the city, but you'll find a little bit more variety. And then you have the New Territories where I lived, which was sort of like the suburbs. That would be like Long Island.
Mm.
Um, and I really liked living there because I was one of the few expats that lived there. Most of the people that lived there spoke Cantonese,
Hmm.
so it was sort of cool and very surreal, um, to just be able to kind of do my own thing and enjoy sort of being fully immersed. Very very few people cared, that I wasn't a local. Um, but I really enjoyed my time there back then. I think now it would be a much different story, but at least in 2013 it was really fun.
Okay. Let's talk about your writing a little bit. Why don't you tell us what compelled you to write the kind of fiction that you write?
I think when I really got into reading, I think I started out some of the Robert B. Parker books, like Spencer for Hire,
Hmm.
were things that I really gravitated towards. And then eventually I started reading more Stephen Hunter and Lee Child and more of the contemporary authors of that genre.
Hmm.
Um, and I think I had always known I'd wanted to be a writer, and I sort of thought that that was the genre that pulled me toward it. Um, when I went to graduate school, it became easier to work on short stories. So I sort of switched to write more, speculative fiction.
Hmm.
Like a good example might be, I wrote a short story once where Superman breaks up with his girlfriend and finds out she's dating Bizarro Superman.
Hmm.
So very, and very much pop culture centric and stuff like that. It wasn't until um, only, a few years ago that I sort of felt compelled to try crime fiction again.
Hmm.
I had read You're Never Really Here, uh, which I thought, because I had been writing short stories mostly, and that's a novella. I thought, okay, this is an opportunity for me to try to do something similar, because Pavement I think is only 100 pages, and I think most of the work that I do tends to be on the shorter side. So
You mentioned Lee Child. He's a little bit more of a mainstream writer. Do you feel like you have aspirations to be more of a mainstream? And I'm not putting any judgment on
no, no,
mainstream. It's,
I think I did. When I was younger, I think, and I especially when I was going back to grad school for writing, I thought this will be this like one of the rungs in the ladder, and I sort of viewed Lee Child as the gold standard of where I wanted to be. Um, Recently, though, I really enjoy where I am. Uh, I think also there's something to be said for working with the people that I'm working with, and sort of in the crowd that I'm in. Um, and I enjoy that much more. I think I've forgotten about any aspirations to do anything bigger than this.
Mhm.
As long as I can keep writing, that's really all that I'm interested in doing at this point.
If you don't mind telling us, how'd you get hooked up with All Due Respect? How did that happen?
That I remember. I think I had put a list together of places that would publish crime fiction that would accept open submissions, and I think All Due Respect was the first place that I submitted to, not knowing whether I would ever hear back from them, or if they had a huge slush pile of books that they were considering, and then Chris Radigan emailed me back and said he enjoyed reading my book, and if I wouldn't mind making a couple of minor changes, we could
Mhm.
move forward with it. I said, I'll do whatever you want, and that became the start of I mean, he's been an extremely supportive and great person to work with.
Mhm.
So that, I mean, it was sort of luck, I guess, that I just happened to think about them as the first place I would submit to, and then just sort of see what happened, and everything kind of came together.
You told me that you have a memoir coming out soon. Do you want to talk about that?
Sure, yeah, that I think I think I've always kept some sort of journal since I was abroad. I had thought one day I'll write about my experiences abroad, and it could be an interesting travel log or something. And then I kept updating it, and then after I was in the hospital and came out, I thought, well, I think it would be worthwhile to write about my experiences, teaching, working various jobs, relationships I've had, um, especially recovery from the aneurysm. And the memoir just sort of became, like the book had before that, an opportunity to kind of stay engaged with everything, and it aided in my recovery. And then it was just sort of fun to reminisce about what it was like teaching middle school, uh, and what it was like going to the racetrack in Hong Kong, and just mingling with the locals while we were there, and what it was. I also felt like there would be a lot of people who could benefit from reading about my recovery experience,
Hmm.
who were also dealing with head injuries, just knowing that they're not alone. So it sort of became an opportunity to move forward with that. And then yeah, and then I decided to self-publish it because I figured it would be a difficult sell to try and find a publisher. Um, there are so many movie references, and at first I had footnotes, so I thought, okay, just logistically that's going to be a nightmare for an editor to try and work with. But I can thankfully today there are enough avenues that I can just move forward with it myself, and that would so that'll be out June 29th.
Mm. You say it's going to be self-published.
Yeah, yeah.
Regarding your aneurysm, can you tell us a little bit about that? What?
Sure.
I mean,
Sure.
anything you're comfortable talking about?
Yeah, I was actually, the school year had just ended, and I had actually gone to a concert the night before, so I was feeling great, and I was going to fly to go visit my folks, and when I got to the gate, I started sweating uncontrollably, like I had just run a marathon. Which in hindsight, I probably should have been more concerned than I was. But I thought, okay, well, maybe I'm getting the flu, or maybe I'm coming down with something. Let me just get on the plane, and I'll be okay. I can take a nap. So when I got up and tried to board the plane, the floor started to shift like it was in a fun house, and I fell on the jetway. So it was one of those things where thankfully I didn't get on the plane. I wasn't on the train. I wasn't in the bathroom. And because it was early in the morning at the airport, first responders were able to get there. And they took me to the hospital. So, I mean, part of the last half of the memoir basically is about that, starting from that experience through to some really funny moments, although you wouldn't think that there would be many of them, but like there was a part of, I was told, I don't have any memories of my time in intensive care, but I was told that at one point my family who'd flown up to be with me said that I told everyone we had to leave because an assassin was going to come kill everyone. And my mother said, "Don't worry. He called and I spoke to him and he canceled. So he's not going to come." So there are moments, obviously then it was probably not as funny as it is now to think back on it. But I split the memoir into a comedy and a tragedy section. And it's always interesting to see that there are plenty of things in the tragedy section that are really funny, and a lot of things in the comedy section that you could view as tragic. So it no, I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, it's fascinating. I'm fascinated by the idea of an assassin calling and agreeing to call it off.
Yeah, I mean, I have to give my mom credit for thinking of that on the fly, and sort of, and I just agree. I said, okay, that's great. I think there was a moment where they needed to get my computer password to access my laptop,
Right.
and they said that I would be on the verge of giving it to them, and then I would stop and remind them about how important it was to protect that information. And then in the end, I didn't end up giving it, but they were able to circumvent that somehow, and they were able to get in. But things now, like I look back on that now and I laugh. And the hitman thing, calling to cancel, just other things like that. There's a whole section about online dating experiences, especially after the aneurysm, where it ends up playing like it's a Curb Your Enthusiasm episode, trying to figure out, like, okay, at what point do you mention you've had a ruptured brain aneurysm? Like, hey, do you want to split the chicken fingers? By the way, So there were a lot of funny things that sort of stemmed from it.
How does that usually go when you mention the brain aneurysm on a date?
Uh, it it was interesting. The first I sort of realized after the first maybe two times that it was important not to mention it. I mean, not I always went into it thinking don't mention it right away. Like don't that shouldn't be the first thing that happens. I sort of figured if there was a natural segue that
Hmm.
I could bring it up. Um, Most of the time they were surprised but then curious,
Hmm.
uh, which I sort of took as a good sign, I think. The whole online dating thing is really uh, not my thing.
Hmm.
Um, so I found it all to be, you know, I couldn't tell if they just weren't interested or what, because sometimes it would seem like it went well, even with telling them that I had the aneurysm. Um, One person had a cousin, I think, who'd had one.
Hmm.
Uh, so I figured, okay, well, at least we can talk about that for a little bit, and then maybe we'll talk about something else. But I would never hear back from them for a second date. So
Oh,
perhaps it wasn't the best move.
yeah. Wow, that doesn't bode well. Let me ask you this, going back to your fiction. Would you describe your fiction as dark? You write dark fiction?
I probably don't think it is,
No?
but I would imagine it probably. I mean, there's the a lot of the characters I write about are certainly pretty. They're I think they all have like a code. So
Hmm.
there's people won't compromise their beliefs, but they will definitely kill someone at the drop of a hat. So
Hmm.
uh, what's great is usually I'll ask my father to read the first draft of something because he really likes crime fiction and hard boiled stuff. So
Hmm.
he'll give me the one end of the spectrum in terms of feedback. Like I think you should have this guy kill more people, or he's got to be like this unstoppable machine. And then I'll ask my mother to read it, who doesn't like reading crime fiction, but her feedback will be something that will let me know how clear it was, or if something didn't make sense. So I end up getting both. But I mean, she's confirmed that it's dark. I don't think he has. So I would have to probably say yes based on her suggestion.
Hmm.
But I never really set out to do, like, that's not the goal really, to see, can I put how far can I push this. I think I think it just naturally, the type of characters I tend to write about, it just naturally comes out that way.
And I think most people who have been described as writers of dark fiction would probably agree. Nobody ever sets out and says, "Oh, I'm," but the things that interest crime writers tend to be on the more unsavory side of behavior, shall we say. Um, what do you think, though, as our culture appears to want to scrub anything that's unpleasant out of our fiction and our entertainment? Um, do you think that's a good direction to go for society in general?
Well, I tend to think things work sort of as a pendulum.
Mm.
I think right now the pendulum is swinging in one direction. There are a lot of things that are happening that I disagree with. I remember talking to a friend recently about whether or not All in the Family could be made today, and
Uh,
we were just talking about sort of like how what that show was able to do, with regard to just sort of showing the stupidity of bigotry, and how it was really great satire. So I think it's important to have work like that that pushes the boundaries. Um, I don't like seeing people pay for that. That where it becomes something that's irrevocable. If you're a comedian and you tell a joke that's meant to sort of push the edge of the envelope, and then I think you should be able to do that without fear of reprisal. Um, I think it'll come back. We'll come back to that eventually. Um, I think it's like it's just it's one of those things where you have boom and busts and rises and falls, and we're in a peak or a valley right now. But as we continue to move forward, the pendulum will shift back.
Well, it's interesting you say that. I have this conversation obviously with a lot of people these days, and some people are very pessimistic at this point. They feel like it's never going to swing back. I tend to agree with you. I think sooner or later, people are going to grow up a little bit and grow a little bit tougher skin. But I'm curious, what do you think? Who do you think will swing the pendulum back? Will it be the artists sort of imposing a more mature approach to things, or will the audience who's the quiet audience who doesn't really speak up about this kind of thing, will they kind of demand that they get a more that they get art or entertainment that treats them like adults?
I think it'll be more of that, more of the latter. I think people who are growing up right now who might not be old enough to appreciate the things we're talking about, I think as they sort of come into their own, they'll be the ones who want to demand to be treated more like adults and make the decisions, to kind of shape culture. I think there are always going to be artists who try to do that. I think it's really a difficult position to be in, to
Mm.
try to affect change now as an artist.
Mm.
I think there was a time where people would look to artists to take their cues on how to act. Um, I don't think that's really the case as much right now. So, which is a shame. But but I think eventually, as I think the audience will demand to be challenged a little bit more, or to make their own decisions again, as opposed to having decisions be made for them.
Very good. Good answer. In my opinion, good answer.
Yes.
Let me ask you this. If you were talking to a new or beginning writer, what sort of advice would you give them?
Well, I think one thing that I've found to be true is I always try to compare writing to doing a sport of some sort, training for a sport. I think there are a lot of people who need to have things a certain way. Like they need to be at home, they need to have no noise, they need to have right between the hours of 8 and 9. Um, I think if you can condition yourself so that you can write anywhere at any time in any circumstances, that's probably one of the best pieces of advice, because you're not always going to get things to be perfect. Um, just in terms of the process. I think the other thing is so many people, and I myself was guilty of this, were it was really difficult not to look at being published as sort of crossing a finish line.
Mm.
Like that'll be the goal. This will have value to it once I get it in a magazine, or if I can get it published. And since then, I've sort of shifted my thinking to think of the process itself as the enjoyable, like have fun doing it. And that way, if it ever gets published by somewhere or someone reads it, great. If they don't, then it's still a win. I think those two things would be what I would recommend to someone starting out. Try to find the enjoyment in the process of doing it, and try to condition yourself so that you can do it at any time and any place.
That's excellent advice. Do you read any indie writers these days?
Yeah, I try to. Reading these days for me is still a little tricky.
Hmm.
But I just read Matt Phillips has a book that's coming out. Um, I think With All Due Respect.
Oh yeah.
So and he had wanted me to review it, so I read that. And then John Bowie had a book that just came out, I think with Close to the Bone. Um, I'm gonna blank on the title, Nightmare Weston or something. Um, and it was a pretty eccentric and crazy. But yeah, I try these days especially. I try to read as many indie writers as I can,
Mhm.
when I can, when I'm able to.
Who are some indie writers we should all be reading?
Well, yourself, I would say, if you consider yourself an indie writer. um,
Yeah, I'm
yeah, I would
I don't have
say.
Stephen King money yet,
Then yeah, I would
and I don't
say
think I ever will.
I would say yourself. Stephen Golds is
Hmm.
another guy. John Bowie, who I'd mentioned, and Matt Phillips.
Hmm.
Um, let's see who else. There are a lot of people who I've met recently who I think will have books coming out, or mostly they're working on short stories. Um, Martine Proctor. Uh, let's see who else. I know I'm gonna blank on a few now, but those would be a couple that I would recommend. Um,
Yeah.
there's more, but
Yeah, don't worry. As somebody always gets left out, writers, we have to have thick skin. So if you leave somebody out, you can just send them a message.
yeah. I mean, it's I there are more, certainly. Just off the top of my head, I will play the brain aneurysm card while I still can.
Okay. Your story, let's just talk quickly about the story that was in Pulp Modern Flash, Unfettered. Um, did you do a lot of research for that story?
That one, not that I was really a fan of James Clavell's Shogun and Taipan and his books.
Hmm.
So I was somewhat familiar with, just naturally, doing reading about that time period in that place.
Hmm.
Um, and then when I was in Hong Kong, I had two friends who were from Japan, so I would talk to them pretty frequently. And then I think the idea actually didn't start, that had been part of a larger work that hadn't really been working, but I liked the part of it that took place in Japan with the samurai, so I just sort of decided to make that the entire story. But yeah, growing up watching or not growing up, but within the last 10 years watching Zatoichi films,
Hmm.
and just being immersed in that culture, I sort of felt like I was familiar with enough of it, and then the rest of it, I thought I could, if I use the right wording, people wouldn't second guess if it was true or not.
Okay, it's a great story.
Thank you.
Unfettered on Pulp Modern Flash. Those of you watching, if you haven't read it, head on over to PM Flash and read it. So, in addition to your memoir, what can we look forward to seeing from you in the future?
Well, as of right now, I've been working on a lot of short stories. I
Mhm.
try to. I've been doing a lot more nonfiction because of the memoir was so much fun to write. I've
Right.
been sort of thinking about other memories that would be fun to get down.
Mhm.
So I've been publishing a lot on a website called The Daily Drunk, which is
Okay.
sort of like 800 word max type thing. So mostly I've just been writing essays about about college experiences I've had, or growing up in New York City, and things along those lines. But yeah, I mean, at some point I'd like to get back to writing longer things. I think for right now it's just nice to kind of have a weekly schedule and work on shorter pieces.
Yeah, you work primarily in short story in the short form and novellas. Do you think at any point you're gonna attempt a novel or like a full?
I don't think so. I mean, bef- before I really knew what I was doing, I I wrote a novel that was a few hundred pages, but it was really sprawling
Mhm.
and overwritten. Um, I
Sounds
may,
like a novel.
I well, but I mean, not. It wasn't an interesting read.
Oh,
It was sort of like all the cliches I could think of, or all the it had way too many characters, and I may go back to it one day and see if I can salvage something, which is what I did with one of my other what became a novella.
mhm.
Um, it was from a longer work, but I think I work better in the shorter form. Um, I don't know if I'd be I'll never say never, but I don't know if I have the ability to write something that would be, novel length at this point. I mean, we'll see. We'll see how it goes.
Okay. I have one last question, just out of curiosity. The night before your aneurysm, you said you went to a concert. Who was it that you
I
saw?
I saw a band called ASG, who I
Mhm.
think are from North Carolina, and a band called Lopan, who are from Ohio, and they were playing at a club in DC whose name escapes me now. But they're both heavy metal bands. Um,
I think I've heard of Lopan actually.
yeah, well, I think they got their name from Big Trouble in Little China. Um, so I mean, that's why they got on my radar to begin with, because I thought that was a cool name. And yeah, it was a small place. It was fun. It was when was that? 2018. So
Yeah, when things were still normal.
things were still normal, and yeah, who knew that would be the last regular evening I'd have for a while.
Yeah, that's pretty amazing. Uh, well, I was going to end the interview, but you mentioned Big Trouble in Little China. Are you a John Carpenter fan?
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. He's yeah. I mean, for They Live for a while was in my top 10. I mean, it probably still is.
Hmm.
Uh, yeah, I mean, movies. That's I originally had thought I would be a screenwriter or try to get into the movie game somehow. That was the first impact, when I was growing up. So yeah, John Carpenter. I mean, his movies had a big impact on me. Big Trouble in Little China, They Live, Escape from New York was huge.
Hmm.
Um, I mean, mostly everything he had done, I guess, in the 80s or 90s and 70s, really. Assault on Precinct 13, just groundbreaking stuff.
That movie has a child getting killed in it, which I still find amazing. Uh,
Yeah, in the first scene,
is that the first scene?
I
It's been
think
a
it's
while
the
since
o-
I've seen it.
I
Yeah,
think it's the opening scene. There's the ice cream truck,
right.
and I think she's killed in the opening scene, which I think was, yeah, incredible that they were able to do that. But yeah, that movie was had a really profound impact. Escape from New York, I said. The Thing,
Hmm.
I thought was incredible. I don't think I overtly take from those movies, but I'm sure that there's definitely influence with how I set a scene up sometimes, or what I'm picturing in my head. When a character is speaking, or the tone that they say it in. But
Well, I noticed that a lot of people in the indie scene like John Carpenter, and I think that I know for me, Escape, the end of Escape from New York, I think is the most perfect ending to a movie ever, and it's so completely nihilistic and cold and cynical and devoid of any kind of lifetime movie network joyfulness. I don't know. I never watched Lifetime, but yeah,
Yeah,
I'm just using that as a
I would agree
as a
with you.
yeah. And
Um,
I think that really, at least when the indie scene, when I first got here in the, I don't know, around 2007 or 8, it seemed like a lot of writers really conveyed that attitude that we're not here to coddle anybody. Like this is what it's really about. And I just that the end of Escape from New York, it just always uh, sticks with me as the attitude you need to write this kind of fiction.
yeah, I would certainly agree with you about the ending being sort of the postcard perfect ending for that movie, but also representing the attitude you'd need. And I think we'll get back there at some point. I mean, I'm hopeful. That's just been my outlook on most things in life now, is just to be hopeful with everything. So I feel like I feel like we're yeah, or I was gonna say probably better that ending than the Big Trouble in Little China ending where the monster comes out of the truck at the end.
Hmm.
But uh, but yeah, no, I think that's right on.
Yeah, I gotta confess, I've only watched Big Trouble in Little China once. It's I know everybody loves that movie, um, but it's not as interesting to me as some of the. I'm gonna kill my phone. As some of the other the early. I'm really into that kind of triptych of Halloween and The Fog and Escape from New York. I think, and of
Yeah,
course, The Thing is good too. But the thing is, he had more money and everything, so he was able to do more. But I think that little tear from '78 to '81 for an independent filmmaker is just incredible.
sure. Yeah, I mean that's those are that's like the holy trinity right there of so and people watching, if you haven't seen those three, you should definitely do that. And what's interesting too about I think the studio wanted Charles Bronson for Escape from New York, and when Kurt Russell, I think spoke because that was Kurt Russell's first break from being a child actor or playing Elvis.
Right.
So, and even though he's kind of channeling some Clint Eastwood, Charles Bronson in there,
Mhm.
it's really like a great, it's perfect for Kurt Russell. Um, but it's funny to think back now and think that they were really pushing Charles Bronson for Snake Plissken.
Yeah, it's not going to work because there's a nice dynamic between Snake and Lee Van Cleef's character, and if Bronson is playing that role, that age difference isn't there, right?
Yeah, yeah,
There's like
no,
a generational thing that would be missing.
yeah, that and Russell just had the charisma too that I think Bronson would have been missing, that Snake needed.
Mhm.
Um, but uh, but yeah, no, I always just found that really sort of funny. That especially it's funny to think back all of the defining roles that certain actors have had. To hear who else had been considered or how close they came to getting the part. But yeah, no, when you had mentioned Escape from New York, that was one that stuck out.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, Kurt Russell knocked it out of the park.
Yes, he did. All right. Well, we could sit here and talk about John Carpenter all day, but we gotta we gotta wrap
Yeah,
this
well,
up.
thank you so much for speaking with me.
Oh, thank you for talking with me and with all my fans, my thousands of fans on ACTV and at Pulp Modern. And hopefully we'll see more work from you at Pulp Modern in the
Yeah,
future.
definitely. Thanks again. And we'll be in touch.
All righty.
All right, take care.